Hello everyone, welcome back. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm very happy today to share with you something that I came across with a couple of days ago after conversation with a colleague. I'm very excited about these because basically I just found one way in which all the different sessions that I've been recording in my channel come together as a glue, giving sense to everything. So this session is not something about anything new, but it's something that for me it's very important because again, it brings together every other aspect that I consider important in education. This session is about a book, Habits of Mind by Costa and Calix. And in this book, the authors are going to make an analysis about what they consider 16 different habits of mind that will support the learning process. Now, this is the book, and in this session, what I'm going to try to do is not go through all 16 of them. Select the ones that for me are more important and try to give you some tips, some hints on what kind of teaching strategies we could implement to create positive habits of mind in the learning process. So basically, this book focuses on the student performance on the challenging conditions. So when we present a problem to the students, when we challenge them to try to find a solution, to bring up problem-solving skills, how will students react, how they could react in order for them to solve that complex problem. So what this book is looking at is the students' behavior when they face something they don't know. And what are the habits of mind that they develop in response to those questions in order to find solutions which are not, again, immediately known. And this is probably a very uncomfortable situation for many students. The majority of them are used to give answers to something that is being clearly explained in class and answering questions which have been worked before or presented to them before in the same format. So what happens when they face a problem which is complex? What kind of reasoning? So what is it, this habit of mind? And I got this definition from the website, the Habit of Minds Institute, that you can see at the bottom as a source. It's basically the disposition towards behaving intelligently when confronted with problems. And this is essential. We need to consider that we are preparing students for professions that do not exist yet. So this is the biggest problem ever, isn't it? This is the biggest unknown problem that students will face and teachers as well. This situation can lead to confusion. This situation leads definitely to uncertainties. So what can we do? How can we support students? What kind of habits we want them to develop so they can be successful in this ever-changing world? So basically, what we're going to try to see is what makes students effective problem solvers. What do we think, again, we need to develop so all the students, and this is also important, we're not talking about high achievers. We're not talking about gifted and talented. We're talking about what makes a person an effective problem solver in all walks of life. It doesn't matter what your profession is. It doesn't matter what your interest is. What is proven is that we will all face complex problems at some point in time. So the sooner we get used to face them, the better. So again, there are 16 different habits of mind, but I'm just going to focus on some of them. The first one that I would like to focus on is persisting. And I'm sorry for that spelling mistake on the title. So basically, what does it mean to persist? It means not to quit. It means not to give up. It means stick to the task until it's completed. It means being able to analyze a problem, and when analyze it, to develop a system that will allow you to attack the problem and solve it successfully. It means employing a range of strategies to solve the problem. And then basically, my proposal, and that's a simple one, how can we develop this trait in classrooms, is that by basically allowing for mistakes and using mistakes as a starting point for improvement. And think flexibly. That's very important. Try to bring a culture of reflection in the classroom where everything could be different and it is okay to be different. Now, allowing for mistakes to be made, it's having a feeling of vulnerability, isn't it? Because we can also make mistakes as teachers. But we need to stick, continue improving and trying our best. So this is my first advice. When we try to develop the idea of persisting among our students, it's important that we make them understand and realize that making mistakes is not going to be punished. Now, this will affect, of course, potential assessment strategies and grading. So a discussion to have is the importance of formative assessment and how formative assessment should lead to feedback that, based on mistakes being made, the feedback proposes steps for improvement. Let's try to see the second one. The second habit of mine that I would like to insist on is the idea of thinking before we act. Is the idea of consider alternatives and consequences of whatever we do, whatever we say. Is to try to teach to be organized and plan a strategy which fits perfectly well into the previous slide. One way of developing this trait in our classrooms is by implementing what I call reflective practices. And I have 2 sessions recorded about reflective practices. One of them is about slow looking as one of the thinking routines, which is looking carefully at the problem and reflect, and before we act, we structure our ideas. And the other one is the implementation of the Kolb's learning cycle, which is the one that you have on this diagram on the left-hand side, which basically is moving from a description to the feelings that come up after describing something, after observing something, then evaluating those feelings, getting conclusions from this evaluation, and taking action. And then that's a cycle that goes on and on. But it's important that we give the students the chance to reflect. And this, of course, my experience says that the biggest problem when implementing reflection strategies is the time. So that's why it's important when we plan ahead, when we consider in every unit time given to the students to reflect on their learning process. Another one which is very important to me is empathy. So this is not curriculum related, it's probably more related to development of character traits, or this holistic idea of education, when listening is the beginning of understanding. But listening with a flexible mind, which means listening, and that process of listening should lead to a reflection, a flexibility of understanding. How can we develop that in class? Well, on top of teaching about perspective, teaching about points of view, trying to bring up debates, try to create arguments with your students, I propose this strategy which is called the HERE strategy. The HERE strategy stands up for halt, engage, anticipate, and replay. So halt means stop, listen. And then once we listen, have something in mind so you can engage into a discussion. In that engagement, try to anticipate what your partner is going to say in that conversation, and then replay to that comment. And again, this is a cycle, and we can try to use this strategy to develop empathy, because by asking students to halt, to pause, to listen, we invite them to reflect with a flexible mind into what their partner is saying. And I think this is absolutely amazing. to see how can we teach empathy, integrate it, implement it into the curriculum, but developing a character trait. Another one, it's probably my favorite one, which is the idea of metacognition, thinking beyond thinking, the ability to know what we know and what we don't know. And it's again based on reflection. Reflection and evaluation on the way we think and on what we think. And there are many, many ways to develop this trait, many. But my favorite one is a simple one, is self-assessment or peer assessment. Why? Because through self-assessment, what we do is we allow students to review, reread, and reflect on a piece of work that he or she has produced. And then based on that, what we do is that we have students considering first what they know, what they already know. So they're applying prior knowledge to this. And then they also reflect on what they don't know. So what are the areas for improvement? What is the typical if or better, even better if? And then based on that, they will then reflect. So what do I have to master that? What are my goals now? Now that I've analyzed what I know, what I didn't know, what are my goals? And then those goals will be structured in an action plan. So by doing the self-assessment or peer assessment, what I know is what I'm doing is I'm reflecting on what I know and what I don't know. And I'm also reflecting on the way in which I think. So this activity of self-assessment, if it's done properly and systematically, it definitely helps students to improve their reflection process and their metacognition. Another one is using inquiry, and that's a very simplistic one, isn't it? Make sure that we know how to ask questions. Now the questions, that's another story. It's not asking questions for the sake of it. Those questions must be meaningful. And there's another session that I recorded a couple of weeks ago, which is called Essential Questions. So I invite you to go and look at that session and see how the questions lead to learning and lead to reflecting, and how those questions must be open-ended, and why those questions should lead to alternative points of view, and why those questions should lead to reflection. And this picture that you have there is the typical activity that you can do at any age. And you can present this picture to the students and ask them, what direction is the bus going? Right or left? And asking them, they can ask as many questions as they want, but they need to see that moving on. So basically, by looking at this picture, what can happen is that you can have students thinking one way or the other, but it's important that you always ask them why. And what's the point? Why are they saying that's the direction? And then trying to reflect on that process. And this should be done in a visible way. So it can be seen also as a visible thinking routine if you want. Now a tip, if you want to find the answer to these, there is an answer, and you just need to look at the door. Where's the door? And then hopefully now you know if it's going that direction or that. And another habit of mine could be, or the one that I really feel it's important, it's the thinking process and the communication process in class. We should be clear in the way that it should be able to, all students, all members of the class should be able to understand that process. Now the problem we have is that we can analyze the communication process, we can measure it, because communication is being done visually or verbally out loud. Now, how can we make the thinking process visible? And that's the most complex situation. If we want to measure, if we want to evaluate the thinking process, this must be done in a visible way. And my advice is that we can use any of the visible thinking routines from Harvard Project Zero, for example, which we spoke about it in other sessions. But this is another possibility. And there are many more. Again, there are 16 habits of mind. These are some others. The use of data, and how can we gather data through all senses, and how can we integrate that into classrooms, or developing creative skills, or maybe being risk takers, and probably finding humor is important as well, because part of the teaching process is to be able to bring or to engage students through And one of the best ways, in particular with teenagers, is that they bring in the findings. An interesting picture with the source in there from the Institute for Habits of Mind, and the 16 are there, and you will probably see that I just selected a few. The ones that I think can be used as an umbrella, because all the other ones fit perfectly well into those that I just mentioned. Yeah, so again, feel free to write your questions or share your experience with that on the chat. And then if you have any question, just feel free to put it there. I'll be more than happy to answer. Thank you.